Michael Owen stared at the screen of his laptop, his coffee growing cold beside him. The email that had just arrived felt like a punch to the gut. After 30 years of building Owen Construction from the ground up, his own brother and business partner, David, had been secretly negotiating to sell the company to their biggest competitor. The morning sun filtered through his home office window, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk, the same desk where he and David had drafted their first business plan decades ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Back then, they'd been two ambitious kids with nothing but dreams and their father's old toolbox. "Everything okay, honey?" Sarah's voice carried from the doorway. His wife of 28 years stood there, concern etched across her face. She was already dressed for her job at the local art gallery, her silver-streaked dark hair elegantly styled. "Yeah, just some business stuff," Michael replied, forcing a smile. He couldn't bring himself to share the betrayal, not yet. Sarah had always been close to David's wife, Claire. They'd raised their kids together, shared holidays, weathered life's storms as a family. How could he shatter that? The email from Janet Chen, his longtime corporate attorney, was clear. She'd discovered the negotiations by chance while reviewing some routine documents. David had been meeting with Pyramid Construction's executives for months, structuring a deal that would effectively push Michael out of the company's leadership. Michael's hands trembled as he closed the laptop. The weight of 3 decades of memories pressed down on him. He remembered the late nights David and he had spent poring over blueprints, the celebrations after landing their first major contract, the pride in their father's eyes when they'd finally bought out their biggest local competitor. "I'm heading out," Sarah called. "Don't forget we're having dinner with David and Claire tonight." Claire's been so excited about trying that new Italian place downtown. The dinner. Michael had completely forgotten. His stomach churned at the thought of sitting across from his brother, making small talk while this betrayal festered between them. But maybe that was exactly what he needed, a chance to read David's face, to understand why. Throughout the day, Michael went through the motions at work. He nodded through meetings, signed documents, and answered calls, all while watching his brother through new eyes. David was his usual self, jovial, backslapping, the eternal optimist who could charm clients with a smile and a well-timed joke. "Big project coming up," David mentioned casually as they passed in the hallway. "We should discuss it over drinks soon." Michael wondered if this was how David planned to break the news. Over drinks, like they were discussing any other business deal. As if selling out their father's legacy was just another transaction. That evening, as Michael and Sarah pulled up to the restaurant, he noticed David's new Mercedes in the parking lot, a recent purchase that had raised eyebrows in the family. Now Michael wondered where the money had really come from. The restaurant was elegant, with soft lighting and the gentle murmur of conversations floating through the air. Claire greeted them with her usual warmth, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace while David ordered a bottle of expensive wine. To family, David proposed a toast, his eyes meeting Michael's across the table. Was there guilt in that glance, or was Michael imagining it? As the evening progressed, Michael watched his brother carefully. He noticed how David's hand shook slightly when pouring wine, how his laugh seemed forced when Claire mentioned their upcoming family vacation together. Small tells that Michael might have missed if he hadn't known the truth. The conversation drifted to their children, David's son starting medical school, Michael's daughter making partner at her law firm. Family achievements that had always been shared victories. Now each mention felt like another crack in the foundation of their relationship. "Remember when Dad used to take us to construction sites on weekends?" David suddenly asked, his voice thick with nostalgia. "He always said the most important thing in business was trust." Michael felt his fork freeze halfway to his mouth. Was this David's conscience speaking, or was he just playing his role? The question gnawed at him as he watched his brother's face in the candlelight. As the evening drew to a close, Claire pulled out her phone to show Sarah photos of potential vacation homes in the Hamptons. "We're thinking of investing in a place," she explained excitedly. "Something for the whole family to enjoy." Michael caught the slight tension in David's shoulders at this revelation. A vacation home would require substantial capital that might soon be available through a secret deal with Pyramid Construction. In the car ride home, Sarah chatted happily about Claire's vacation home plans, but Michael barely heard her. His mind was racing, piecing together months of small inconsistencies that suddenly made sense: David's mysterious meetings, the new car, his increased interest in the company's detailed financials. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah's phone chimed with a text. "Oh, Claire wants to know if we'd like to join them for brunch on Sunday." Apparently, David has some big news to share. Michael stared at their darkened house, the home where they'd raised their children, built their dreams. Sunday. His brother was planning to destroy everything they'd built together over brunch. "Tell her we'll be there," he said quietly, his decision made. He had until Sunday to figure out exactly how deep this betrayal went, and more importantly, how to protect everything their father had sacrificed to build. The porch light cast long shadows across their front yard as they walked to the door. In the distance, a dog barked, and somewhere a car alarm briefly sounded. But all Michael could hear was his father's voice from long ago: "Boys, in this business, your word is your bond. Without trust, you have nothing." As he lay in bed that night, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside him, Michael opened his laptop one last time. The email from Janet Chin glowed in the darkness, but now there was a second message below it, this one from an anonymous sender, with attachments that promised to reveal even darker secrets within Owen Construction. His finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. Some truths, once known, could never be unknown. But as he thought of David's toast to family, Michael clicked the email open, and began to read. The anonymous email contained 3 PDF attachments and a single line of text: "Your father didn't die from a heart attack." Michael sat in his darkened study at 3 a.m., the soft glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face as he processed what he was seeing. Financial records, old medical reports, and a series of photographs that challenged everything he thought he knew about Owen Construction's history. His father's death 15 years ago had been the catalyst that transformed their small family business into a regional powerhouse. The insurance payout had funded their expansion into commercial development, and David had been the one who handled all the paperwork. At the time, Michael had been too grief-stricken to question anything. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him quickly close the laptop. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her old silk robe. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, moving behind his chair to massage his shoulders. Her touch, normally comforting, felt like another reminder of all the secrets he was keeping from her. "Just reviewing some old files," he lied, hating how easily the deception came. Was this how David felt, living with his own lies? Sarah's hands paused on his shoulders. "Michael, I've known you for 30 years. Something's wrong, and it's more than just work stress." He reached up to squeeze her hand, wondering how much to share. The medical examiner's report in the email had used terms like "suspicious levels" and "possible intentional overdose." The implications were too horrific to voice. "Do you remember the night Dad died?" he asked carefully. Sarah moved to perch on the edge of his desk, her face thoughtful. "Of course. David called us from the hospital. He'd found your father collapsed in his office during their late-night meeting." "Their meeting?" Michael's voice was hollow. "Did David ever say what the meeting was about?" "I don't." Sarah frowned. "No, now that you mention it. Claire told me later that David had been acting strange that whole week, but everyone assumed it was just the shock." Michael opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, the entire Owen family at the company's 20th anniversary celebration, just 2 months before his father's death. His father stood proudly between his sons, one hand on each of their shoulders. David was smiling, but there was something in his eyes that Michael had never noticed before. "Sarah, if you discovered something terrible about someone you loved, would you want to know the truth?" She studied his face in the dim light. This is about David, isn't it? I saw how you were watching him at dinner. And now these questions about your father. Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Janet Chen, emergency. Meet me at the office now. Don't tell anyone. Sarah read the message over his shoulder. Go, she said firmly. But when you come back, we talk. No more secrets. The city streets were eerily empty at this hour. As Michael drove to the office, his mind raced through memories, David's increasing nervousness around their father in those final weeks, the mysterious changes to the company's insurance policies just days before the death, the missing files that David had claimed were lost in a computer crash. The Owen construction building loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a single light on the top floor, Janet's office. As Michael pulled into the parking garage, he noticed another car he recognized, Claire's SUV. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, he heard raised voices coming from Janet's office. He approached quietly, his heart pounding. You can't prove anything. Claire's voice was shrill, desperate. It was 15 years ago. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder, Mrs. Owen. Janet's reply was cold. And I have proof that you and your husband. The voices stopped abruptly as Michael's shadow fell across the doorway. Claire spun around, her face pale with shock. She was clutching a familiar-looking manila envelope, identical to the one attached to the anonymous email. Michael. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. I was just. Janet called me about some old paperwork. About Dad's death. Michael's voice was steady, calmer than he felt. Or about David's deal with Pyramid Construction. Claire's hand flew to her throat, a gesture so reminiscent of their mother that it made Michael's chest ache. You don't understand, she whispered. We never meant. David was just trying to protect the company. By killing our father. The words hung in the air like poison. Janet stepped forward, placing a stack of documents on her desk. I found these in a sealed file during my review. Your father had discovered significant financial irregularities. He was planning to confront David the night he died. Financial irregularities? Michael's mouth was dry. What kind? Money laundering. Janet's voice was grim. Your father had evidence that David was using the company to clean money for some very dangerous people. When he threatened to go to the authorities. A noise in the hallway made them all freeze. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the familiar sound of David's slight limp, a souvenir from a construction accident years ago. Claire's eyes darted to the window, then to the door, like a trapped animal. The manila envelope shook in her hands. He'll kill me if he knows I'm here, she whispered, and Michael saw real fear in her eyes. You don't know what he's capable of, what he's done to protect his secrets. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Michael had seconds to decide, confront his brother now, or play along and dig deeper into this web of lies. Behind him, Janet slowly reached for her phone, and Claire backed away from the door, tears streaming down her face. The handle turned, and Michael Owen faced the moment that would change his family forever. The door opened with the weight of 30 years of shared history. David stood in the doorway, his silver hair disheveled, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled. The sight of his brother's familiar face, now haunted and drawn, made Michael's chest tighten with a mixture of love and revulsion. I knew I'd find you here, David said softly, his eyes moving from Michael to Claire, then settling on the document spread across Janet's desk. Though I didn't expect my own wife to betray me quite so soon. Claire pressed herself against the window, the manila envelope clutched to her chest like a shield. I couldn't keep carrying this, David. The nightmares, the guilt. I see his face every night. Michael watched his brother's expression shift, a subtle change he'd seen countless times across negotiating tables, but never understood its true meaning until now. It was the look of a man calculating his next move, weighing the cost of violence against the price of mercy. "You were there that night, weren't you, Claire?" Michael asked, his voice gentle despite the hurricane of emotions inside him. "When Dad died?" A sob escaped Claire's throat. "I was supposed to be the lookout. Just the lookout. David said it would be quick, a few pills in his coffee, enough to make it look like heart failure. But your father, he fought so hard." "Shut up." David's command cracked like a whip, making Claire flinch. 15 years of keeping our family safe, building something greater than Dad could have ever imagined, and you throw it away because of nightmares? Janet moved subtly, positioning herself between David and Claire. "Your father was building a case against you," she said, tapping the documents on her desk. "Bank records, witness statements, photographs. He knew about the money laundering, the connections to organized crime. He was going to destroy everything." David's voice dropped to a whisper, thick with an emotion Michael couldn't quite identify, regret, perhaps, or something darker. "The company, our reputation, our children's future. I offered him a choice: retire quietly, let me handle things my way. But he was always so righteous, so certain he knew best." Michael thought of their father's last family dinner, just days before his death. How he'd hugged his grandchildren extra tight, told old stories about their childhood, made them promise to always look after each other. Had he known what was coming? The money laundering didn't stop after Dad died, did it? Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. "That's why you're so desperate to sell to Pyramid. They're not just buying the company, they're buying your silence." David laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet office. "You always were the smart one, Mike. Dad's golden boy, the honest builder who never asked too many questions about where the money came from during the lean years." "What are you talking about? You think we survived the recession on hard work alone? Those government contracts that saved us? They came with strings, brother. Dad knew it, just like he knew what would happen if he stopped playing along. I just helped him make the right choice." The weight of this revelation staggered Michael. He grabbed the edge of Janet's desk for support, his mind racing through years of memories, rewriting their family history with this new, terrible knowledge. Claire's voice broke through his thoughts, trembling but determined. "Show him the pictures, Janet. Show him what his brother really is." David moved with surprising speed for a man his age. His hand shot out, grabbing Claire's arm with enough force to make her cry out. The manila envelope fell, spilling photographs across the floor, crime scene photos that had never been part of the official investigation. "Let her go." Michael's command was quiet but firm. "It's over, David. No more violence." "Over?" David's grip on Claire's arm tightened. "Nothing's over. You think you can judge me? Everything I did was for this family. Every compromise, every deal with the devil, it was all to protect what Dad built." "Dad built an honest business," Michael countered, taking a careful step toward his brother. "He taught us that integrity was worth more than profit." "Integrity doesn't keep the lights on," David shouted. "It doesn't pay for your daughter's law school or Claire's cancer treatments or mom's nursing home. The world runs on dirty money, brother. I just made sure our family got our share." A security guard, drawn by the shouting, appeared in the doorway. David's face contorted with a desperate calculation. In that moment, Michael saw what Claire must have been living with for 15 years, the razor's edge between David's public charm and private violence. "David," Michael said softly, using the same tone he'd used when they were boys and David's temper threatened to get him into trouble. "Let her go. Please. For the sake of everything we once were to each other." Something cracked in David's expression, a fracture in the mask he'd worn for so long. His hand fell away from Claire's arm, leaving angry red marks on her skin. She stumbled away, into Janet's protective embrace. "You'll lose everything, David warned, his voice breaking. Once this gets out, the company, our reputation, everything Dad sacrificed for will be destroyed. Michael looked at the scattered photographs, the documents that proved their father's murder, the tears on Claire's face. The cost of truth would be devastating, but the price of silence had already been too high. Some things are worth losing, he said, thinking of Sarah waiting at home, of the promise of no more secrets. Some truths have to be told, no matter the cost. The security guard stepped forward, hand on his radio. David's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him like air from a punctured tire. In that moment, he looked old, vulnerable, the big brother who had once carried Michael home after he broke his leg playing baseball, who had taught him to drive, who had stood beside him at their mother's hospital bed. "I never meant for any of this to happen," David whispered, and for the first time in 15 years, Michael heard genuine remorse in his voice. "It just got away from me." One compromise led to another, and then. The city lights twinkled beyond the office windows, oblivious to the family tragedy unfolding in their glow. As the security guard made his call and Janet began gathering evidence, Michael found himself facing the hardest question of all: how do you honor the memory of a murdered father while finding compassion for the brother who killed him? Claire's words from earlier echoed in his mind: some truths can break a family forever. As he watched his brother sink into a chair, head in his hands, Michael wondered if there was anything left of their family to break. Dawn broke over the city as Michael sat in the hospital waiting room, watching Claire sleep fitfully in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. After her collapse at the office, the doctors had insisted on keeping her overnight for observation. The bruises on her arm had darkened to purple, each mark a testament to years of silent suffering. Sarah arrived with coffee and fresh clothes, her face etched with concern. She'd taken the news about David with remarkable strength, though Michael had seen her hands shaking as she packed a bag for Claire. Now she sat beside her friend of 30 years, gently smoothing Claire's hair as she would for a sick child. "She's been talking in her sleep," Michael said softly. "Apologizing to Dad over and over." Sarah's hand stilled. "All those years, I never saw. I mean, there were moments when something felt off, but David was so good at explaining everything away. The perfect brother, the perfect husband, the perfect businessman. The perfect lie," Michael finished, his voice hollow. David was in custody now, the evidence of both financial crimes and their father's murder too overwhelming to ignore. Yet Michael couldn't stop seeing the brother who had taught him to ride a bike, who had stood beside him at his wedding, who had wept genuine tears at their father's funeral. Claire stirred, her eyes opening with the startled awareness of someone used to being on guard. "Emma," she whispered. "Someone needs to tell Emma." Their niece was due to finish her residency interview at Mass General that afternoon. The thought of her learning about her father's crimes from the news made Michael's stomach turn. "I'll call her," Sarah offered, but Claire caught her hand. "No, I need to do it. I owe her the truth. All of it." Claire's voice cracked. "She deserves to know why I stayed silent for so long, why I let her grow up thinking her grandfather's death was natural. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me." Michael watched as Claire struggled to sit up, noting how she automatically checked the room's exits, a habit born from years of living with David's unpredictable rages. How many family dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual gatherings had been colored by this underlying current of fear? "I kept a diary," Claire said suddenly, her fingers twisting the hospital blanket. "Hidden in the false bottom of my jewelry box. Every incident, every threat, every time he. It started small, you know. A grabbed arm here, a threatening comment there. By the time I realized how deep it went, he had evidence of my involvement in your father's death. He made sure I knew I'd go to prison if I ever talked." Sarah made a small, wounded sound. "The weekend at our lake house, 3 summers ago. When you said you fell down the stairs. He found out I'd been talking to a divorce lawyer." Claire's voice was barely audible. "Said he'd destroy everything, the company, our family's reputation, Emma's future. Your father made the same choice, tried to stand up to him. Look what happened. Michael's phone buzzed, a message from Janet. The investigation was expanding. The FBI had found connections between Owen Construction's projects and several known criminal organizations. Their father's meticulous records, preserved by Janet all these years, were providing a roadmap to decades of corruption. "Emma's calling," Claire whispered, staring at her phone like it might bite her. Her hand trembled as she answered, putting it on speaker. "Mom." Emma's voice filled the hospital room, worried and confused. "Why are there FBI agents here at my interview? What's going on?" Claire closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something. About your father, about your grandfather, about who I've been pretending to be for the past 15 years. As Claire began to speak, Michael felt Sarah's hand slip into his. The truth was pouring out now, unstoppable as a spring flood. Each revelation seemed to age Emma's voice, transforming her from the confident young doctor-to-be into a wounded child trying to understand why her world was shattering. "All those times you tried to get me to live on campus," Emma said, realization dawning in her voice. "The way you insisted I take that fellowship across the country, you were trying to protect me from him, weren't you? I thought if I could just get you far enough away." Claire's voice broke. "If I could give you a chance at a life untouched by all this." "I'm coming home," Emma declared. "Right now. I don't care about the interview." "No." The force of Claire's response made her wince. "No, sweetheart. You've worked too hard for this. Your father, he can't hurt us anymore. I need you to finish this interview. Show them the brilliant doctor I know you are. Then come home, and we'll face whatever comes next together." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice thick with tears but determined. "I love you, Mom. All those times I was angry with you for being overprotective, for seeming weak. I didn't understand. I'm so sorry." After the call ended, Claire seemed to collapse in on herself, as if the weight of truth had physically exhausted her. Sarah held her as she sobbed, years of carefully maintained composure crumbling away. Michael stepped out of the room, needing a moment to breathe. In the hospital corridor, life went on, doctors making rounds, nurses checking charts, families visiting loved ones. Normal life, untouched by the earthquake that had just devastated his family. His phone buzzed again. A text from his daughter Rachel, "Dad, it's all over the news. Please tell me it's not true. Tell me Uncle David didn't kill Grandpa." Michael stared at the message, remembering how David had doted on Rachel when she was little, how he'd helped her with math homework, attended every school play. How do you explain to someone that love and evil can exist in the same heart? That the uncle who taught her to ride a bike was the same man who killed her grandfather and terrorized her aunt? Through the hospital room window, he watched Sarah comforting Claire, two women whose 30-year friendship had survived this ultimate test of truth. Perhaps that was the answer, not in explanations or justifications, but in the simple act of being present, of bearing witness to both the darkness and the light in those we love. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays catching the wedding ring on Michael's finger, a simple gold band that matched the one David had worn while orchestrating their father's murder. Some bonds, Michael realized, were forged by blood and history. Others were chosen, built on truth and courage and the hard work of healing. As he turned to rejoin his wife and sister-in-law, Michael's phone lit up with another call. This time, it was David's lawyer. The lawyer's message was simple but devastating: David wanted to see Claire. One last conversation before he accepted the plea deal that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. Claire's hands trembled as Michael shared the request, but her voice remained steady. "I need to do this," she said, meeting Michael's concerned gaze. "Not for him, but for me. For Emma. For all the words I've kept buried inside for 15 years. 3 days later, Claire stood in the prison visiting room, Sarah and Michael waiting supportively just outside. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, the blue dress she'd worn to Emma's medical school graduation, a symbol of the strength she'd found in motherhood. No makeup concealed the fading bruises on her arm. She wanted David to see the visible proof of his actions. Emma had arrived from Boston the night before, her residency interview successfully completed despite the chaos. Now she sat in the prison parking lot, working on her patient notes, refusing to let her father's crimes derail her dreams any longer. David appeared in prison orange, his silver hair unkempt, his confident posture diminished by handcuffs and shame. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them held 15 years of fear, rage, and unspoken truths. "You look well," David said finally, his voice smaller than Claire had ever heard it. "I saw Emma's name in the hospital newsletter. Chief resident candidate at Mass General." "No." Claire's voice was firm. "You don't get to claim any part of her success. Every achievement, every milestone, those belong to her. And to me. We succeeded despite you, not because of you." David flinched as if struck. "Claire, I never meant to become a monster." She leaned forward, her fear finally transforming into righteous anger. "To kill your own father? To make your wife and daughter live in constant fear? Which part didn't you mean, David?" Her voice remained low but carried the force of years of suppressed truth. "Do you know what it was like? Planning escape routes every time we entered a room? Teaching Emma to gauge your moods, to make herself small and quiet when your hands started twitching? Watching our beautiful, brilliant daughter learn to survive instead of just living?" David's facade cracked. "I loved you. Both of you. Everything I did was about control," Claire finished. "Not love. Love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't threaten. Love doesn't kill." She pulled out her old diary from her purse, the record of years of abuse she'd kept hidden. "I'm donating this to a domestic violence research project. Every incident, every manipulation, every time you made me complicit in your crimes. It's all here. Maybe it will help other women recognize the signs before it's too late." "They'll destroy my reputation completely," David whispered. "Everything I built. Everything you stole," Claire corrected gently. "From your father, from your brother, from your daughter's childhood. The truth is your legacy now, David. The only gift you can give Emma is to finally take responsibility for your actions." She stood, smoothing her dress with steady hands. "I'm not angry anymore," she realized aloud, surprised by the truth of it. "I'm just free." Outside, Emma looked up from her medical texts as her mother emerged. Claire's face was tear-stained but peaceful, like someone who had finally set down an unbearable weight. Without a word, Emma wrapped her arms around her mother, both women drawing strength from each other. Michael watched them, thinking of his own daughter Rachel's reaction to the truth. She'd shown up at their house the previous night, demanding the whole story. When he finished telling her everything, she'd been quiet for a long moment before asking, "Dad, were there signs? Things we should have seen?" The question had haunted him. How many family dinners, holiday gatherings, and casual conversations had been colored by hints of David's true nature? How had they all missed the pain behind Claire's perfect hostess smile, the fear beneath Emma's academic achievements? Sarah approached now, carrying coffee for everyone. The morning sun caught her wedding ring, the same ring she'd worn when making her quiet promise to Claire years ago, "Whatever happens, you're not alone." She'd kept that promise, even when she didn't fully understand what she was promising. The DA called, Michael said softly as they gathered around a small table in the prison's outdoor waiting area. "They want to talk to all of us. About Dad, about the company, about everything." Emma looked up from her mother's embrace. "The hospital board is meeting tomorrow. They're concerned about, well, everything. My fellowship, my residency. Let them be concerned, Claire said firmly. You've earned every achievement on your own merit. Your father's crimes don't define you. Sarah nodded. The art gallery is already getting calls. People love a scandal. But we'll weather this together, just like we've weathered everything else. Michael watched his family, not the perfect image they'd maintained for so long, but the real, scarred, healing people beneath. Claire's quiet strength, Emma's resilience, Sarah's unwavering loyalty. Even Rachel, who was now organizing a support group for children of domestic violence, turning pain into purpose. His phone buzzed with another message from Janet. The FBI had found more evidence in David's private files, decades of manipulation, blackmail, and violence that went far beyond their family. The truth was still unfolding, each revelation like a stone dropped in a pond, ripples touching lives they'd never even known about. But here, in this moment, Michael saw something else unfolding too. Healing, sprouting like green shoots after a forest fire. Claire's newfound voice, Emma's determined focus on her medical career, the strengthened bonds between the women who had survived David's darkness. As they gathered their belongings to leave the prison, Emma suddenly stopped. Mom. Remember when you used to say that broken things could be made beautiful again? Like those Japanese bowls repaired with gold. Claire touched her daughter's cheek, seeing both the wounded child and the strong woman she'd become. Kintsugi, she said softly. The art of precious scars. The sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long across the prison parking lot. Ahead lay more challenges, legal battles, public scrutiny, the hard work of rebuilding trust. But they would face it together, their bond stronger for having been tested, their love deeper for having survived the darkness. Michael's phone buzzed one final time. The message was from Rachel. Dad, I think I found something in Grandpa's old files. Something that changes everything. The old Owen family lake house stood silent in the gathering dusk, its weathered walls holding decades of memories both bright and dark. Rachel met them on the porch, clutching a worn leather briefcase she'd found hidden in the basement wall during her childhood, her grandfather's secret archive. I used to think it was just a game, Rachel said softly as they gathered in the living room. The way Grandpa would tap certain walls when he visited, how he'd tell me stories about secret compartments in old houses. I never realized he was leaving us breadcrumbs. Claire sat close to Emma on the ancient sofa, their shoulders touching, drawing strength from each other's presence. Sarah moved quietly through the room, lighting old oil lamps as the sun faded, their warm glow creating a circle of intimacy around the family. Dad knew, Rachel continued, carefully opening the briefcase. He knew David was involved with dangerous people, knew the company was being used for money laundering. But he also knew something else, he was gathering evidence to protect us all. Inside the briefcase lay meticulously organized documents, photographs, and several sealed envelopes. One was addressed simply, "For my son's wives." Claire's hands trembled as she opened the letter, Sarah reading over her shoulder. Their father-in-law's familiar handwriting filled the pages. My dear Claire and Sarah. If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I've watched David's darkness grow, seen how it shadows your lives, especially yours, Claire. Know that your silence was never weakness, it was survival, and I understood. You protected your daughter with the fierce grace of a mother's love, and I've been gathering evidence not just against David, but for you. Sarah, your quiet strength has been a beacon in our family. The way you've supported Claire, created safe spaces without judgment, shown what true sisterhood means, you've embodied everything I hoped for when my son's married. Enclosed you'll find documents proving that Claire was coerced into any involvement with the company's illegal activities. There's also evidence of David's abuse, which I documented even when I felt powerless to stop it. I hoped this proof would eventually help you break free. Most importantly, there are trust documents. I established a separate, clean foundation in Emma and Rachel's names. No matter what happens to the company, their futures are secured. Claire, this includes provisions for you, resources I've hidden from David, meant to give you the freedom to leave when you found the courage. My greatest regret is not confronting David sooner, not finding a way to protect you all from his poison. But know this, the legacy of Owen Construction isn't in its buildings or bank accounts. It's in the strength I see in you, in my granddaughters, in the love that survives even the darkest nights. With all my love. Dad. Claire pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely. He knew. All those times he invited us to Sunday dinners, insisted on family gatherings, he was trying to keep us close, keep us safe. Emma reached for her mother's hand. Those special projects he invented for me in his workshop. The way he taught me to build things, to trust my own judgment. He was showing me I could create something solid and true, even when everything else felt unstable. Rachel spread more documents across the coffee table, evidence of their grandfather's secret campaign to protect his family while building a case against his own son. Years of careful documentation, resources hidden away, contingency plans laid with loving foresight. There's more, Rachel said, pulling out another envelope. Instructions for Michael, about rebuilding the company. Clean contracts, legitimate projects, everything needed to start fresh. Dad wasn't just trying to expose David's crimes, he was making sure we'd have a foundation to rebuild on. Michael stood by the window, watching the lake water turn silver in the fading light. He remembered fishing with his father here, the quiet conversations that now took on new meaning. He always said a man's true legacy is in the lives he touches, not the fortunes he builds. Sarah moved to stand beside her husband, her presence steady and warm. We can honor that legacy. Not by hiding the truth, but by using it to help others. The foundation could fund domestic violence programs, support children affected by family trauma. A shelter, Claire said suddenly, sitting straighter. The old Miller Street property, we could convert it into a shelter. Counseling services, job training, legal aid. Everything I wished I'd had access to 15 years ago. Emma's eyes lit up with purpose. I could coordinate with the hospital, set up a medical care program. So many survivors avoid seeking treatment because they're afraid of questions, of judgment. As the women began planning, their voices growing stronger with shared purpose, Michael watched the transformation. Here was his father's true legacy, not in the buildings that bore their name, but in the healing and hope rising from the ashes of tragedy. Rachel pulled out one final envelope, this one sealed with red wax and marked, "For David." Michael recognized his father's military seal press, unused since his service days. Should we? Rachel hesitated. No, Michael said gently. That's for David to read when he's ready. If he's ever ready. Dad knew some healing can't be rushed. Outside, an owl called across the darkening lake. Inside, the oil lamps cast warm light on faces lined with tears but bright with purpose. Claire and Emma sat close together, their bodies relaxed in a way Michael had never seen before, as if decades of tension had finally released its hold. Sarah and Rachel bent over foundation documents, already sketching plans for transforming tragedy into triumph. Michael touched the worn leather of his father's briefcase, feeling the weight of its contents, not just evidence and legal papers, but a father's love expressed through meticulous planning, through quiet resistance, through faith in his family's strength to survive and heal. Dad used to say that the strongest buildings have survived earthquakes, he said softly. That you learn more about a structure's integrity from how it handles disaster than how it looks on a sunny day. Claire looked up, her face peaceful in the lamplight. We survived the earthquake. Now we build something new on the foundation of that strength. Emma squeezed her mother's hand. Something beautiful. Something true, Rachel added. Sarah's voice completed the chorus, something that helps others find their way home. The lake house creaked gently in the evening wind, its old bones settling. Within its walls, a family pieced itself back together, not into the perfect image they'd once maintained, but into something more real and precious. Their bonds, tested by fire and strengthened by truth, gleamed like gold in the darkness. Michael thought of his brother, sitting in a prison cell with their father's final letter waiting to be read. Perhaps someday, David would find his way back to the light. But for now, this was enough: the quiet strength of women supporting each other, the power of secrets finally spoken, the legacy of love that survived even the deepest betrayal. The night deepened around the lake house, stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky. Inside, illuminated by lamplight and love, a family continued their journey of healing, their voices rising and falling like gentle waves against the shore. They were writing a new story now, one of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of true family, not defined by blood or business, but by the choice to stand together, to heal together, to build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. In the end, that was their father's greatest gift, not the evidence that brought justice, but the faith that they would find their way back to love, back to truth, back to each other. And in that faith, they found their strength to begin again.